It was a Tuesday night in late October, the kind of night where the wind rattled the windows and the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. David Miller sat hunched over his laptop in the dim glow of his home office. His wife, Rachel, should have been home hours ago. Instead, he found himself lost in the orbit of another woman. A woman he had never met in person, but who had consumed his thoughts for months. Her name was Maya. At least that's what she called herself online. The cursor blinked at the end of her latest message. You'd be better off without her. She doesn't understand you the way I do. David's fingers hovered above the keyboard. He was torn, as he always was, guilt on one side, desire on the other. He had never told Maya that he was married, not outright, but she knew. She always seemed to know. That's when the sound cut through his thoughts. Police sirens, growing louder until blue and red lights flashed through the blinds of the study. His stomach dropped. Moments later, pounding on the front door, David stumbled into the hallway, heart racing. He opened the door to find two officers, their expressions grim. "Mr. Miller?" one asked. "Yes," he croaked. "I'm afraid there's been an incident. We need you to come with us." The words blurred together after that, but one phrase burned into his mind, seared forever. "Your wife has been found. She's dead." The world tilted. His knees gave out, and in the haze of disbelief and terror, his phone buzzed on the desk behind him. Another message from Maya. "Now you're free." Maplewood wasn't the kind of town where people locked their doors at night, tucked neatly in the outskirts of Cincinnati. It was a cluster of well-kept lawns, red brick homes, and neighbors who waved from across driveways. David and Rachel Miller had been fixtures of this place for nearly a decade. They met in college. He was a quiet, bookish computer science major. She a vibrant early childhood education student with a knack for making friends wherever she went. Their relationship had begun like any young love story. Late-night pizza runs, stolen kisses in library corners, promises of forever whispered under blankets. By 35, they had the life that most of Maplewood envied. David worked from home as a freelance software consultant. Rachel taught kindergarten at Maplewood Elementary, adored by her students and fellow teachers alike. They had a modest two-story house with white shutters and a dog named Buddy, who barked every morning at the mail truck. Outsiders might call their marriage solid. Rachel posted smiling holiday photos online. Her arm always looped through David's. At barbecues, neighbors recalled, she was the one cracking jokes while David stood back, smiling quietly but proudly at his wife's charisma. But what people didn't see was a slow unraveling underneath. Rachel had wanted children. For years they had tried. Doctor's visits, fertility treatments, prayers whispered in darkened rooms. Nothing. The unspoken tension carved a canyon between them. One neither wanted to admit existed. David, ever introverted, retreated into his work. Nights found him hunched over his computer, immersed in code, or, more dangerously, the anonymous corridors of online chat rooms. That's where he met Maya. At first, she was just another username in a forum about tech entrepreneurship. Their conversations began innocently. Startups, software, the future of artificial intelligence. But within weeks, the tone shifted. Maya's words reached into places David hadn't let anyone near in years. "You must feel invisible in your own home," she wrote one night. "I see you. I understand you." He didn't tell Rachel. How could he? He wasn't cheating. At least, that's what he told himself. There were no hotel rooms, no physical touches. Just words. Words that felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. Rachel noticed. Of course. She noticed the way he guarded his laptop, the way he smiled at his phone late at night, the way conversations between them grew shorter, clipped. She asked once, "Is there someone else?" David had laughed too quickly, too loudly. Of course not. And yet, in ways Maplewood could never have imagined there was. Maya was unlike anyone David Miller had ever known, or thought he knew. She appeared first as a username on a late-night forum for tech entrepreneurs. At the time, David was scrolling through threads about coding bugs and remote freelancing. She had responded to one of his posts with a sharp, witty reply that made him laugh out loud, startling even himself. Her screen name was Maya Horizon. She claimed to be a freelance graphic designer based in Chicago, but her words made her feel closer than any city on a map. At first, it was harmless. At least, that's what David told himself. They traded jokes about bad clients, memes about tech culture. Then came late-night private messages. Soon, they weren't talking about work at all. Maya's words had a gravity he couldn't resist. "You must feel invisible sometimes," she wrote one night. "Like no one really sees you." David froze at the screen. How could she know? That invisible ache was exactly what he lived with day after day in his tidy Maplewood house. He typed back cautiously. "Sometimes, yeah, I see you," she replied. "I understand you." That was the beginning. Within weeks, their chats turned into hours-long conversations, stretching past midnight, while Rachel slept upstairs. Maya teased him about his safe life in the suburbs. She told him he deserved more than mowing lawns and nodding at neighbors. She called him brilliant, unique, special. The flattery landed like rain on parched earth. Rachel loved him, yes, but their marriage had become wrapped in unspoken sadness, the constant weight of infertility treatments, of doctor visits and crushed hopes. Their conversations had shrunk to logistics, bills, groceries, school events. The tenderness had drained away. With Maya, the tenderness was endless, but her questions grew darker. She wanted to know about Rachel, her schedule, her routines, her habits. What time does she leave in the morning? Where does she park at school? Does she ever go anywhere alone at night? David laughed him off at first. "What are you, a stalker?" he typed. "I just worry about you," she replied. "If she hurts you, I want to protect you." He told himself it was harmless curiosity. After all, what harm could words on a screen do? October 28th began like any ordinary school day. Rachel arrived early to Maplewood Elementary to prepare her classroom for the upcoming Halloween parade. She was dressed in jeans, a soft gray sweater, her auburn hair tied back in a loose bun. Parents who saw her that morning remembered her smile, the way she crouched down to greet children at eye level. She was one of those teachers who made every kid feel special, Principal Decker later told reporters. "You don't replace people like that." After school ended, Rachel stayed behind. She pinned up construction paper pumpkins, taped black bats to the hallway walls, and double-checked costume guidelines. At 9:34 p.m., she texted David, "Be home soon. Love you." It would be her last message. Security footage later showed Rachel leaving the school parking lot around 9:45 p.m. Her silver Honda Civic headed east toward Maplewood. She should have been home by 10, but she never walked to the front door. When she didn't arrive, David told himself she was running late, maybe picking up groceries. By 11, he was restless, pacing. By 11:30, he was back at his desk, staring at Maya's latest message. "She doesn't deserve you. You'd be happier if she were gone." At 12:15 a.m., he heard the sirens. By dawn, Rachel's Civic was discovered in the lot of a shuttered strip mall 2 miles from home. Her purse was still on the passenger seat. Her phone was dead, tucked into a side pocket. In the trunk, wrapped hastily in a painter's tarp, was Rachel's body. She had been struck in the head, strangled, and folded into the narrow space like discarded luggage. Detective Laura Grant, one of the first on scene, described it later. It wasn't random. Whoever did this got close to her. Close enough that she didn't fight or scream. This was personal. For Maplewood, the discovery was unthinkable. For police, the first and most obvious suspect was a husband. By 7 a.m., 2 patrol cars were parked in front of the Miller's home. David, pale and trembling, opened the door. Buddy, the dog, barked nervously at the uniforms crowding the porch. "Mr. Miller?" Detective Grant's voice was firm but not unkind. "We need to ask you some questions." At the station, under the harsh buzz of fluorescent lights, David sat across from Grant and her partner, Detective Miguel Reyes. "Where were you last night?" Grant asked. "Home," David replied. His voice cracked. "Working. Can anyone verify that?" "No. Rachel was supposed to come home." Grant studied him carefully. "Did you and your wife have problems?" Every husband gets asked this, David thought. Every husband is a suspect. He swallowed. We were fine. But the detectives already knew about the infertility treatments. They already knew about arguments overheard by neighbors. They already knew David had been increasingly withdrawn in recent months. Reyes leaned in. Mr. Miller, someone put your wife in her own trunk. That doesn't just happen. Who would want to hurt her? David's mouth went dry. He thought of Maya. The late-night whispers. The probing questions about Rachel's habits. The messages about being better off. But how could he say that out loud? How could he explain to two seasoned detectives that he'd been pouring his soul into a relationship with a woman he'd never met? Not me, he said hoarsely. I loved her. The detectives exchanged a glance. By evening, David was released, no evidence yet, no confession. But suspicion clung to him like smoke. Neighbors whispered, reporters circled, friends sent cautious texts. And alone in his office, David stared at a new message blinking on his screen. It's done. Now you're free. The news of Rachel Miller's death spread across Maplewood like wildfire. By the second day, reporters camped outside the Miller residence, microphones ready, eager to capture the grief or guilt of a husband under suspicion. David sat inside with blinds drawn, Buddy pressed against his leg like a sentinel sensing danger. His phone vibrated endlessly with messages from friends, co-workers, even distant relatives. We're so sorry. What happened? We saw the news. Call us. But there was one message thread David couldn't stop staring at. Maya, her last words, it's done. Now you're free, burned across the screen. He typed furiously. What do you mean? What did you do? No reply. Hours passed. No green dots. No typing bubbles. Just silence. Meanwhile, Detective Laura Grant and Miguel Reyes prepared their second round of questioning. In their experience, a grieving spouse's behavior told volumes. Some cried until exhaustion. Others collapsed into numbness. But those who lied, the ones covering tracks, usually slipped under pressure. Grant believed David was hiding something. Bring him in again, she told Reyes. We squeeze harder. That evening, David found himself under interrogation lights once more. You said you were home the night your wife was killed. Reyes began. Can you prove that? I told you I was working, David answered, his hands clasped tight on the table. Grant slid a folder across the metal surface. Inside were photos of Rachel's car, the tarp, her lifeless face. You expect us to believe you were tapping away at a laptop while this was happening 2 miles from your house? Her tone cut like a knife. David flinched at the images. I didn't do this. Then who did? Silence. He thought of Maya. He thought of her words, the late-night questions about Rachel's schedule. But to speak her name out loud would mean admitting everything. The secret online affair, the lies, the guilt. I don't know, he whispered. Grant's eyes narrowed. We'll find out. David walked out of the station that night, not in cuffs, but with the weight of suspicion crushing his chest. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every sound outside his house felt like footsteps coming closer. And in the quiet hours before dawn, another message appeared. Don't tell them about me. Trust me, this is for us. By the third week of the investigation, detectives had warrants in hand for David's electronic devices. His laptop, his phone, his cloud backups, all were carted away in evidence bags. Digital forensic analyst Tanya Blake combed through the data, her eyes scanning lines of code, metadata, timestamps. What she found sent shivers through the task force. Thousands of messages, late-night conversations stretching for months, and woven into them, threads of obsession and manipulation. She's the reason you're unhappy. If she wasn't in the way, you'd be free. You don't need her. You need me. Detectives pored over printouts of the chats. Grant jabbed her pen at one. That's practically a confession. Reyes shook his head. Not from him. From her. Whoever this Maya is. But Maya was elusive. Her IP addresses hopped like stones across rivers. Chicago one day, Toronto the next, then vanishing behind encrypted servers. Burner emails, anonymous accounts, disposable messaging apps. Still, patterns emerged. On October 28th, the night of Rachel's murder, there was a message timestamped 10:58 p.m., precisely when investigators believed Rachel was attacked. "I'll take care of everything." Sent from Maya to David. When Grant confronted him with it, David felt the blood drain from his face. "What does this mean, Mr. Miller?" she demanded. "I don't know," he stammered. "I swear I don't know. Did you ask her to kill your wife?" "No." His voice cracked. I never wanted this." But desire and intent blurred in the cold glow of a courtroom. Every would have hung heavy. Grant pushed harder. "Then explain why she's writing this to you, minutes before your wife is murdered." David's throat closed. He couldn't. After hours of interrogation, he was released again. But detectives were more convinced than ever that Maya wasn't just a fantasy. She was real, and she had blood on her hands. Maplewood buzzed with theories. Some swore David was guilty, convinced the mystery woman was just a cover story. Others whispered about jealous ex-lovers, angry parents, even rumors of gang activity spilling into the suburbs. Police chased every lead. A parent Rachel had once disciplined at school had sent threatening emails a year prior. He had an alibi. A neighbor's security camera caught a dark SUV circling the block near the time of the murder. It turned out to be a pizza delivery driver. A co-worker mentioned Rachel receiving strange phone calls in recent weeks. Phone records traced them to a prepaid burner, untraceable. Each path crumbled into dead ends, but then came a breakthrough. Buried inside the metadata of a message, Blake discovered a slip-up, an IP address that hadn't been properly masked. It didn't point to Chicago. It didn't point to Toronto. It pointed to Ohio. Within 15 miles of Maplewood, Reyes leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. She's not some distant online ghost. She's here. Grant's voice was steel. Then we find her before she kills again. The trace that analyst Tanya Blake uncovered changed everything. The digital ghost had always felt untouchable, cloaked in layers of VPNs and burner accounts. But that single slip, an unmasked IP, landed squarely in Hamilton County, Ohio. Not Chicago, not Toronto, not the digital ether, right in their backyard. Detectives Grant and Reyes worked with cybercrime specialists to map activity. The address pointed toward a woman named Angela Pierce, living in a modest one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Norwood. 15 miles from Maplewood, Angela was 29, unemployed, with a string of short-term jobs and a criminal record littered with disturbing patterns, harassment complaints, restraining orders from former partners, a dismissed assault charge. Her neighbors described her as quiet but intense. One man said she would sit on the fire escape at night, chain-smoking, muttering to herself. Another recalled hearing her shouting into her phone at all hours. On paper, she was Maya. The brunette photos matched. The timelines matched. The obsession matched. Grant stared at the file. We've got her. But police didn't rush in. They watched first. Surveillance revealed unsettling truths. Angela had no steady friends, no visitors, yet she spent hours each day glued to her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. When detectives pulled her trash, they found scribbled notes. She doesn't deserve him. Make him see. Make him free. 10:45 p.m., school strip mall. The last note chilled everyone in the briefing room. It was a timeline, Rachel's timeline. On November 17th, 3 weeks after Rachel's murder, detectives executed a search warrant on Angela Pierce's apartment. The space was a shrine to obsession. Printed photos of David Miller, pulled from LinkedIn, Facebook, even an old college alumni site, were tacked to her wall. Red string connected images of Rachel to sticky notes scrawled with insults. Obstacle. Cage. She'll never give him children. Her laptop was worse. Forensic teams uncovered dozens of accounts tied to Maya Horizon, thousands of messages to David, each one designed to erode his marriage and tether him tighter to her. And then the smoking gun. GPS logs placing Angela's phone at the strip mall where Rachel's body was found. Photographs of Rachel's Civic, taken hours before the murder. A Notes app entry saved at 11:08 p.m., moments after Rachel's estimated time of death. She's gone. He'll be mine now. Angela was arrested that afternoon, in the interrogation room. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She stared at Grant with unnerving calm. "He belongs to me," she said simply. "You killed Rachel Miller," Grant pressed. "She was in the way. I removed her. That's what love does." Reyes leaned forward. "Love doesn't strangle a woman and stuff her in a trunk." Angela smiled faintly. "You don't understand in the way I do. He wanted this. He told me." Grant slammed her hand on the table. "He never told you to kill his wife." Angela didn't flinch. He didn't have to. When detectives relayed Angela's words to David, his body sagged in a chair as though the weight of it finally crushed him. "She said you wanted it." Grant told him, his eyes filled with tears. I swear, I never asked her." But the evidence painted a murkier picture. The late-night chats where he complained about feeling trapped. The messages where Maya whispered about freedom, about life without Rachel. His silence when she suggested dark possibilities. To Angela, those silences were permission. And to detectives, they raised haunting questions. Was David a victim of manipulation, or had he secretly welcomed it? The community divided. Some neighbors muttered that he must have known. Others pitted him, believing he'd been ensnared by a predator. In one devastating confrontation, prosecutors played David a snippet of Angela's interrogation. "She said you want her gone," Reyes explained. "Listen." The tape hissed before Angela's voice filled the room. "He wanted this." He was too scared to say it. "But I knew. I did it for us." David buried his face in his hands. He had wanted escape, yes. He had longed for something different, something more, but never this. Never his wife's body in a trunk. The line between guilt and innocence blurred. His emotional betrayal was undeniable. His legal guilt, less so, and still, the question clawed at him night after night. If he hadn't answered that first message, if he hadn't let her in, would Rachel still be alive? The courthouse in downtown Cincinnati was a fortress of stone and glass, built to outlast the storms of human frailty it witnessed daily. On March 3rd, it became the stage for one of Maplewood's darkest tragedies. Angela Pierce stood accused of first-degree murder, stalking, and identity fraud. The prosecution had an iron wall of evidence: digital footprints, surveillance, the obsessive shrine in her apartment, and above all, Rachel Miller's final hours traced through Angela's notes. The courtroom was packed. Local reporters filled the front benches. Neighbors craned their necks to glimpse the woman who had lived just miles away while masquerading online as Maya. David Miller sat stiffly behind the prosecution's table, his face drawn, his hands clenched. He wasn't on trial, not officially. But every eye flicked toward him. Was he complicit? Was he merely naive? Or was he the second victim in a crime of obsession? Assistant District Attorney Carla Jennings opened with a voice sharp as a scalpel. Angela Pierce did not stumble into David Miller's life by accident. She hunted him. She manipulated him. And when Rachel Miller stood in the way, Angela murdered her in cold blood. Jurors were shown the notes app entry, projected on a screen. "She's gone. He'll be mine now." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Jennings laid bare the calculated steps. The fake identity, the grooming of David, the surveillance of Rachel, the final ambush near the strip mall. This was not love, Jennings thundered. This was possession. Angela's public defender, a weary man named Peter Callahan, tried to spin a different story. Angela was mentally ill, a woman lost in delusions, incapable of distinguishing fantasy from reality. He painted her as lonely, abandoned, intoxicated by digital intimacy. She believed, Callahan said, that David Miller wanted this. In her fractured mind, she thought she was fulfilling a promise of love. But the jury wasn't buying it. The mountain of evidence was too high, the planning too deliberate. Angela's own words, captured in interrogation, betrayed her. "I removed her." That's what love does. The hardest moment came when David was called to testify. He walked the witness box under 1,000 eyes, feeling every ounce of judgment pressing down. His voice cracked as he admitted to the months of late-night conversations with Maya. She made me feel seen, he confessed. I never asked her to hurt Rachel. I never wanted that. I thought it was just words. The prosecutor leaned in. Did you ever suspect she might act violently? David shook his head, shame flooding his cheeks. I was blind, and because of that, Rachel's dead. His testimony silenced the room. It was a confession of guilt, but it was an indictment of himself. After 9 days of testimony and 3 hours of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. Angela Pierce showed no fear, no remorse. On the charge of first-degree murder, the foreman read, "We find defendant guilty. On the charge of aggravated stalking, guilty. On the charge of identity fraud, guilty." Rachel's parents clutched each other, tears streaming. David closed his eyes. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, addressed Angela directly. "You constructed a fantasy world, then spilled blood to protect it. You ended the life of an innocent woman, and in doing so, shattered countless others. You will spend the rest of your days in prison, where your delusions can harm no one else." Sentence: life without the possibility of parole. Angela showed the faintest smile. As deputies led her away, she glanced once at David and whispered, almost tenderly, "We could have been perfect." The trial ended, but the shadows lingered. Maplewood was never the same. Neighbors still whisper at block parties, their once-safe suburb scarred by what had festered unseen behind glowing screens. Rachel's colleagues at Maplewood Elementary held a candlelight vigil. Her classroom, filled with tiny desks and hand-drawn pictures, stood empty until the end of the school year. David withdrew from public life. He sold a house, rehomed Buddy with Rachel's parents, and vanished from Maplewood. Some said he moved to Columbus. Others thought farther. Wherever he went, he carried the unbearable truth. He had opened the door that let Angela in. Detective Grant later reflected on the case in an interview. People think murder starts with knives or guns. Sometimes it starts with words on a screen, a fantasy, a whisper, and then one day, fantasy becomes action. And by then, it's too late. The case rippled beyond Ohio. News programs debated the dangers of digital obsession, the blurred lines between online fantasy and real-world violence. Law enforcement agencies cited it as a cautionary tale in training sessions about cyberstalking and psychological grooming. And yet, for all the headlines, one truth remained painfully intimate. Rachel Miller was gone. A bright teacher, a loving daughter, a woman whose only mistake was trusting that her husband's midnight typing was harmless. The murder of Rachel Miller did not vanish into the fog of crime statistics. It carried weight in Maplewood, in Ohio, and across the nation. Journalists called it the Catfish Killing or the Maya Horizon Murder, shorthand for the way fantasy and deception had spiraled into lethal violence. But behind the lurid headlines, policymakers and advocates saw an urgent wake-up call. Before Rachel's death, online relationships were often dismissed as harmless escapism, a fringe hobby for lonely hearts. But the case exposed a darker truth. Virtual personas could be weaponized with real-world consequences. Cybercrime experts testified before state legislatures, using Angela Pierce's meticulous manipulation of David as a case study. Training manuals for law enforcement began including modules on digital grooming, not only for children, but for adults targeted by predators with obsessive or violent tendencies. Detective Grant would later say in a seminar, "We teach officers now that if someone's online partner starts asking for surveillance-level details about a spouse, their routes, their habits, that's not just gossip. That's a threat. We can't afford to ignore those warning signs anymore." In 2017, Ohio lawmakers introduced what became known as Rachel's Law. The legislation expanded the definition of stalking to include repeated, manipulative online communication when it was tied to planning or encouraging real-world harm. The law also strengthened penalties for creating fake digital identities with the intent to deceive or control another person, closing loopholes that Angela Pierce had exploited with Maya Horizon. Other states soon followed, adopting similar measures. National advocacy groups cited Rachel's case when pushing for updated cyber-stalking statutes. Closer to home, Maplewood Elementary created the Rachel Miller Memorial Scholarship for students pursuing teaching degrees. Each year, a graduating senior was awarded funds in her name. At the first ceremony, the principal told the packed auditorium, Rachel believed in building futures. Her life was taken, but her legacy will build futures for others. Neighborhood watch programs also quietly adapted. What once had been about porch lights and suspicious vans expanded to include digital awareness. Workshops on recognizing online grooming and reporting harassment became common at community centers and libraries. Perhaps the most haunting legacy was the warning David Miller's life embodied. He never faced charges, but he never escaped public judgment. Occasionally, after vanishing from Maplewood, he agreed to speak privately to advocacy groups about the dangers of digital intimacy. His words were always the same, clipped and heavy. I thought I was just chatting. I thought it was harmless. But words have weight. And when you feed a fantasy, you don't control where it ends. Years later, criminologists would still cite the Maya Horizon case in textbooks about digital psychology. The consensus was sobering. Obsession doesn't need proximity. A predator doesn't need to lurk in the shadows of your street. They can enter your life through a screen, build trust, and reshape your choices until reality bends. And yet, amidst the grief, Rachel's case saved lives. Her story galvanized new laws, reshaped police training, and forced communities to rethink how much danger can hide in the glow of a screen. At Rachel's gravesite, her epitaph read simply, "She taught with love. She lived with joy." Though her life was stolen, her death echoed outward, sparking protections for others who might otherwise have been caught in the same web. And that, perhaps, is a quiet redemption that even in tragedy, society learned. It became a little wiser, a little more guarded, and a little more determined to prevent another love story from turning into a headline drenched in loss.